there, welcome back. What are you doing? Turn that off. What? Jeez, What?
You said we were going to talk about AC/DC.
No. I'm going to talk about AC and DC, the powering systems for train modelers.
Can't we at least play it in the background? Might make the video more interesting.
No, we can't play music. In fact, if you play any more, we'll probably get this video cut off from YouTube. So stop.
For goodness sakes. Like, somebody's going to actually pay money and buy this video, and AC/DC is going to be out a couple of pennies. Oy.
No, stop! No, AC and DC, also known as 3-rail and 2-rail.
Sometimes he's just hard to live with.
Hi there. Welcome back to episode 3 of the Model Train Outsider. And today, I want to talk about the powering systems that you will run into when you begin deciding to get into model training. And that is AC, also known as 3-rail, and DC, also called 2-rail, because we're talking about the tracks. Any kind of train system you run, when you go out and buy your first little Tyco or Lionel kit, or you've been doing it forever, you're gonna run into how to power it. And regardless of American or European trains, regardless of scale, the power to your trains comes through the rail. There is a power supply system that is connected to your track somehow, and that's where the power comes from. Now, before I really knew what I was getting into, I had already made a decision. Well, let's check that. He already made a decision and got us committed to one system. I'm not here to talk about what's better, which one is superior to the other, because you could fill up 20 pages of comments with people arguing back and forth. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the two systems and a little bit about how I got into, or better yet, how he got me into 3-rail. And better yet, let's let him tell you.
Let's go back to that 8-year-old version of me that got his first model train. Anybody who had a train set as a kid, and we're not talking battery operated ones that some people put around the Christmas trees. You know, you got to be of an age, I guess. You had a model train as a kid. You laid down some track. They had a little connector point. You twisted the wire on it, or put it in and it snapped in. You had 2 wires. You put them in. Then you plugged it in. And you had a little control dial. You had a little pad, maybe a little box. And it had a dial. As soon as you started to turn the dial, the train started to move. The more you turned the dial up, the faster the train went. The only other thing on the box was a little switch, and if you clicked it, the train went the other way. You wanted the train to stop, turn the dial down. That was it. That's called analog. Simple, direct control. You control the power, and the power controls the speed of the train. Well, I know a little bit about electronics and electricity, but there are people that make a lot more dollars an hour than I do who can explain it better. But basically, that's DC. It's direct current. You control the amount of current, which controls the amount of power, and that power in the track controls how fast the train moved. And when you jump up to me in the year 2015, who's looking for a train system to run, that's all I knew about trains. You plugged them in, you turned the crank, and they moved. And if you cranked it up, they moved faster. I had no knowledge that there were all kinds of control systems, all kinds of power systems. And when I bought my first train set and found out it was from a company called Märklin, and that it required a type of track which was called C-track, that's what I asked for Christmas. That's what my kids got me. That was my loop, and when I wanted to expand my loop, I bought more C-track. And I bought more C-track, and I bought more C-track. Then I started studying. As I began to look for more trains, and the addiction set in, and that cretin over there was born, I realized I had a lot of studying I had missed and needed to do. Back to you, Happy Pants.
All right, so there you have it, straight from the horse's mouth. So, what is this AC and DC? I was already committed to AC, 3-rail. Well, here's where it starts. First of all, an electrician, physicist can explain this a lot better. AC and DC are how power is sent to the locomotive or the power car. It's sent through the track. Now, the difference between AC, alternating current, and DC, direct current, are that basically, direct current, DC, travels in one route. It goes one way. The electrical current flows one way through the system. Alternating current vibrates. It's a sine wave. And when you have a piece of 3-rail track, and this is a piece, it's made by a company named Märklin. Märklin is the largest producer of model trains in the world. It also is the only one that does 3-rail. So what is 3-rail? Well, it's AC power, but this is why it's called 3-rail. Here's a piece of track, if you can see that there. You have the standard 2 rails that you would see on any track, real or toy. But if you look carefully, there, I'll get it in the light, you can see that this type of track has nubs down the middle of it. These little metal nubs down the middle of it. And if you look at this picture here, even the non-pre-bedded has nubs. This is called c-gleis. It comes already built in a bed of ballast, and you can paint it and try to make it look more realistic, but it isn't very realistic, is it? Märklin also makes what's called K-track, which is more realistic, as you can see in the pictures here, but it still has those nubs going down the middle. DC track here doesn't have those nubs. So what's the difference? Well, AC is alternating current, and therefore you have 3 contact points to get the electrical current flowing. So you have current flowing both through the rails, but also through these nubs. What's the difference? Why? Well, back in the analog days, before there were these DCCs, direct command controls, direct computer control systems, AC track was better. It was better for conducting electricity, power to your toy. For a couple of reasons. Number one, because current flows in both directions, when you build a layout, regardless of where you check your track, the voltage and the ampage will be roughly the same. There's always a loss, but it'll be roughly the same. So if you have a rather large layout, like a basement layout I have here, you're going to have consistent current all the way through the track. On DC, if anybody ever built more than just a little circle, and you had just a basic analog track, but if you built one to go around the floor of a bedroom or something like that, you would have dead areas or dying areas where when you got about as far away as you could from where you plugged the wires into the track, the opposite side, you would notice the locomotive slow down. because in direct current, the further you go away from the source of the power, the more voltage and ampage you lose. So AC didn't have that problem. So every AC powered locomotive or model train, and by the way, technically DC trains are also AC powered. Their motors are AC, but because that's what works, but they have a converter, transformer, something inside that makes them run for DC system. Anyhow, Märklin makes all their locomotives, and any company, and there are a few that make locomotives for Märklin three-rail systems, they have a little ski, a glider, on the bottom of the powering vehicle, whether it's the locomotive or sometimes it's some other car in your consist of trains. That ski rubs along these nubs, and it picks up the juice, the electrical power, along with the rails. That's advantageous, especially in old analog systems, because they're going to have consistent power. They're not going to hit a slowdown point. There's more contact. So if your wheels get dirty or if something's not, there's still so many other contact points to pick up the juice. So AC cars were going to run better. In fact, old Lionel and Tyco trains back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s were all AC powered. They were three-rail tracks. If you go find your grandfather's or great-grandfather's toy train set somewhere, they're three-rail. They don't look anything like realistic rails. But by the 60s and 70s, all the companies had gone to DC. Why? Why DC then? If AC seems to be so superior, why DC? Why is DC even still around? DC is cheaper. The motors are less complex. It's more expensive to have to make 3 rails instead of 2 rails. So DC was cheaper. And most people weren't going to build, at least in DC, gigantic layouts. Now, yes, people were building layouts. What did they do? Well, they had to multiple wire power their track systems. Many people, and in fact they still do this today, people who run DC layouts, DC train tables, they will run power supply to different locations along their layout to maintain a higher level of power. Now, a difference between Märklin C-track and even their K-track and DC track is this, which is why even if this doesn't look quite gorgeous, it's popular with the 3-rail crowd, is because the back. I think you can see this. If you look here, and if you look on the other end, they run a little metal rod down the middle here. That's your nub contacts. But this allows for you to plug in any accessories immediately on the track into the track. You want to put lights, you want to put any sort of operating accessory, little moving scenery, street lights, signals, anything that operates on electrical power. On a DC track or even in the K track, you have to do 2 things. You either have to solder it into your main metal track, or you have to run wires below your table and run them through. And anybody who has either Märklin K-track or DC track, you look under their table and there is a ton of wiring. With this C-track, a lot of wiring is eliminated, especially if you're running a relatively small layout table. You can just directly connect and power things off your power source because it doesn't drain in AC, it doesn't drain from your power supply. On DC, it will. In AC, it doesn't drain. On DC, it drains. Well, then why hasn't AC taken over the world? Why are 70% of the people who run model trains running DC? Have they just not gotten the message? Do they just not have the revelation? No, it comes back to one thing I said earlier. It's cheaper. It's cheaper to make and mass produce the track. It's less expensive to make the motors for the locomotives or the powering cars. AC trains are more expensive, much more expensive on average, anywhere from 15 to 30% more expensive than a DC train. And in a hobby that is already considered very expensive, and I'll talk about that in another video because it doesn't have to be, expense is a key. And because so many companies converted to DC or just started in DC to begin with, 70%, as I mentioned, 70% of the model trains out there are DC. Another difference between 3-rail track and 2-rail track, AC power and DC power, is that originally, when you use 3-rail track, you can just lay it down and you can build multiple loops, tie them all together. You can run 2, 3, 4 trains at once in opposite directions across the layout. In analog DC, you can't do that. In analog DC 2-rail layouts, if you're going to run more than one track, or you want to run trains in different directions, you couldn't. Or you had to do what's called insulation and isolation. There are these little tabs you would have to put in between sections of track, and basically, if you were trying to run 2 circles, or you wanted to create what a lot of people like to create, a backing loop. It's a place where a train can go off the main loop, turn around and come back, a backing loop, or a side track or a parking area. You had to separate that track from your main running lines, because if you're going to try to run a train in the opposite direction, it needs the power switched into the opposite direction. That's why those old analog train systems in the 60s and 70s had the little dial and knob to reverse direction, because it changed the flow of the electrical current. In AC, the current's going both ways all the time. In DC, it goes one direction. And if you suddenly want to send something the other direction, you had to switch the flow. Well, what happens if you got an inner circle and an outer circle connected, and you want one train going one way and one train going the other? If you don't have them insulated, isolated from each other, you're going to burn out one of the engines, because the motors are designed to read the power in one direction. So you have to create a lot of isolation points. You have to switch current. You have to do this on what are called turnouts or switches or points, where you've got your track going one direction and then another direction. So a train can go from an inside line to an outside line, or vice versa. You have to create isolation points. You still really have to do that on DC, even with the new digitalization. So, just in case my rambling and wandering has taken you to many places, let's just review real quickly. AC or 3-rail. Advantages. Well, the advantages of AC 3-rail are you have a more consistent power source. You're not going to have the dead areas, the dying areas, the slow down areas. You have a much consistent power source. And specifically, if you get Miracle C-Track, you have this amazing plug-and-play system. You know, this particular brand is, appropriately enough for me, track for dummies. The disadvantage of AC systems is availability of stock. there just aren't a lot of cars out there. Well, there are. There's a lot. American is the world's largest producer. But not nearly the selection of trains and vehicles and accessories in AC that there is on two-rail DC. So, obviously the advantages of one are the disadvantages of the other. The advantage of DC, cheaper. Anywhere from 10-15% to 30% cheaper. The tracks are cheaper, the locomotives are cheaper, the running cars are cheaper. And it's just more readily available. You can go to any of the dying number of American model train stores or hobby stores that still sell train stuff, because you don't find it very much. They'll all be DC. Finding AC, you have to find somebody who is a licensed American dealer. So just finding a store, the closest store to me just closed. Now I have to drive over an hour and a half away if I want to go shopping for track in person. I need some C-track today. I need a turnout in C-track today. I got to drive an hour and a half. I do most of my shopping online, so it doesn't matter. So hopefully this gives you something more to think about. Because if you're going to get into this hobby and not waste a lot of money, you need to think about these things. All right. So this was episode 3, a little bit about AC and DC. You can't go wrong. Enjoy it, have fun, and I'll see you back here sometime for episode 4.